The year is 1897. Winter grips the English countryside with merciless fingers. A blizzard descends upon the lonely road leading to Iping, a village so small that strangers are remembered for generations. Snow swirls in violent eddies. Fog clings to the frozen earth like a burial shroud. The wind howls through bare trees, carrying with it the promise of isolation. Through this desolate landscape, a figure emerges. He walks with the deliberate heaviness of a man carrying an unbearable burden. Every inch of him is concealed. Thick bandages wrap around his head in tight, methodical layers. Dark goggles hide his eyes completely. A wide-brimmed hat sits low. A heavy coat hangs from shoulders that seem to shudder with each breath. This is not a traveler seeking warmth. This is not a wounded man seeking help. This is a man fleeing from something far worse than the winter cold. Fleeing from the consequences of knowledge itself. His name is Griffin, and he has done something that cannot be undone. Act 1. The stranger arrives. The village of Iping is a place where nothing ever happens. The same families have lived here for centuries. The same conversations repeat in the same public houses. Life follows rhythms established long before anyone can remember. Until the stranger arrives at the Coach and Horses Inn. Mrs. Hall, the innkeeper, is a practical woman who measures guests by the weight of their coin purse. When the bandaged stranger enters, shaking snow from his coat, she sees only opportunity. He speaks curtly, demands the best room, and pays in advance, generously. "I require absolute privacy," he announces, his voice muffled through layers of cloth. "I am a scientist, conducting experiments of a delicate nature. I must not be disturbed under any circumstances." Mrs. Hall agrees readily. Money has a way of silencing questions. The stranger locks himself in the room. For days, he does not emerge. Strange sounds emanate through the door. The sharp clink of glass striking glass. The hiss of chemical reactions. Muttered curses in the dead of night. The acrid smell of burnt substances seeps into the hallway. Villagers begin to notice peculiarities. A maid swears she saw an empty sleeve gesture violently when she knocked to deliver linens. The local doctor, passing by the window, glimpses what appears to be laboratory equipment floating in midair. A child claims to have heard breathing coming from an empty corner of the inn's parlor. But Mrs. Hall dismisses these concerns. The stranger pays well. That is all that matters. Until the money runs out. When Mrs. Hall confronts Griffin about the unpaid bill, demanding payment or explanation, something inside him breaks. Years of isolation, months of desperation, weeks of hiding, all of it erupts in a single moment of fury. "You want to see?" he shouts. "You want to know?" His hands move to the bandages. Layer by layer, he unwraps. The nose appears first, or rather, does not appear. Where flesh should be, there is only empty air. The mouth vanishes next, revealing the impossible. Words forming in nothingness. The goggles come off, and where eyes should exist, there are only hollow spaces through which the opposite wall can be seen. Mrs. Hall screams. The stranger, no, the invisible man, laughs. It is a sound without source, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "I am invisible!" Griffin declares. "I have conquered the greatest secret of optical science. I am beyond your comprehension." And then, in a flash of movement too quick to follow, he strips away the remaining clothing. The villagers see nothing, but they hear footsteps. They feel the rush of displaced air. They sense a presence that should not exist. Griffin has vanished into the world that can no longer see him. Act 2. The making of a monster. To understand what Griffin became, we must understand what he was. 6 months earlier, in a cramped London laboratory, a young scientist worked in obsessive solitude. Griffin was brilliant. Perhaps the most gifted student his university had ever produced. His understanding of light, refraction, and optical density surpassed even his professors. But brilliance came with bitterness. Griffin resented the boundaries placed upon him. Ethics committees questioned his methods. Colleagues doubted his theories. Society expected him to pursue knowledge slowly, carefully, with concern for consequences. Griffin had no patience for such limitations. His theory was elegant in its simplicity. If a substance could be altered to have the same refractive index as air, light would pass through it completely. It would become invisible. He tested it first on fabric. Success. Then on glass. Success. Then on living tissue. A cat that vanished before his eyes, its meows echoing from empty space. The final test required only one subject, himself. In the dark hours before dawn, Griffin prepared the formula. He calculated dosages with trembling hands. He knew this was irreversible. He knew he had not solved how to restore visibility. But the temptation was too great. To be unseen. To move through the world without detection. To transcend the limitations of ordinary humanity. He drank the solution. The transformation was agony. His body burned from within. Every nerve screamed as cellular structures reorganized. He watched in a mirror as his skin became translucent, then transparent, then simply absent. Blood vessels faded. Bones disappeared. Internal organs vanished into nothingness. When it was over, Griffin looked into the mirror and saw nothing looking back. He had succeeded. He was invisible. He was alone. And he could never go back. Panic set in immediately. The laboratory, filled with evidence of impossible experiments, had to be destroyed. Griffin set fire to his own life's work, watching as flames consumed years of research. Then he fled into the streets of London, naked and unseen, believing himself free. Instead, he had entered a prison with invisible walls. Act 3. The Curse of Invisibility. Griffin's fantasies of power dissolved within hours. Invisibility, he discovered, was not liberation. It was torment. The February cold bit into invisible flesh with the same cruelty it showed to anyone. Every gust of wind reminded him that he was still material, still vulnerable, still mortal. Hunger gnawed at him constantly, but eating revealed him. Food visible in an invisible stomach, creating a grotesque outline of his digestive system until fully absorbed. He could not sleep in public. People would sit on him, step on him, unknowingly crush him. Rain outlined his form. Mud clung to invisible feet. Dust settled on invisible skin. And the greatest torture, complete isolation. No one could see him, which meant no one could acknowledge him. He became a ghost in a world of the living, present, but utterly alone. Desperation drove him to theft. He broke into shops for clothing, for food, for money. Each crime was easier than the last. After all, who could catch what they couldn't see? But even theft had complications. Clothing made him visible again, a walking suit with no one inside. So he traveled naked through the winter cold, stealing only what he could hide. In the town of Port Stowe, Griffin encountered Thomas Marvel, a homeless wanderer, simple and easily frightened. Griffin needed a visible agent, someone to carry his stolen money and guard his remaining notebooks. Marvel never saw his captor. He only felt invisible hands grip his throat and heard a voice whisper threats from empty air. "You will serve me," Griffin commanded. "You will obey every instruction. If you try to escape, I will kill you. You will never see me coming." For weeks, Marvel obeyed, trembling at every breeze, convinced the invisible man watched his every move, until he could endure it no longer. In a moment of desperate courage, Marvel ran to the police, screaming warnings about the invisible threat. He abandoned Griffin's money and notebooks in the street and hid among crowds where even an invisible man would struggle to reach him. Griffin's last connection to the visible world was severed, and something inside him broke completely. Act 4. The Reign of Terror. Betrayal transformed Griffin from fugitive into terrorist. He no longer sought to hide. He sought to dominate. In the small town of Burdock, Griffin made his presence known through violence. Men were struck down by invisible fists. Women felt unseen hands tear at their clothes. Children screamed as invisible fingers pulled their hair. Windows shattered spontaneously. Doors flew open with no one near them. Objects sailed through the air, thrown by hands that couldn't be seen. The police were helpless. How do you arrest what you cannot see? How do you fight an enemy who could be anywhere or nowhere? Griffin reveled in the chaos. He imagined himself as the beginning of a new order. "I will establish a reign of terror," he proclaimed to the empty streets. "I will create a dictatorship based on fear. I am the first of a new race. Invisible, unstoppable, superior." In his mind, he was evolution's next step. In reality, he was simply a man losing his humanity. Desperate and injured from an encounter with an armed mob, Griffin sought refuge with an old university colleague, Dr. Kemp, a respectable physician living in the nearby town. Act 5. The Last Confession. Dr. Kemp answered his door to find no one there. Then Griffin spoke. For hours, the invisible man explained everything: the discovery, the transformation, the suffering, and now the grand vision. He spoke of an invisible army, of kingdoms ruled through unseen force, of humanity kneeling before a power it could not comprehend. Kemp listened carefully. He asked questions. He seemed sympathetic. But Kemp understood what Griffin could not see. His former colleague was no longer a scientist. He was a dangerous man whose isolation had stripped away all moral restraint. When Griffin finally slept, exhausted from confession, Kemp wrote urgent letters to the authorities. Griffin awoke to the sound of police surrounding the house. The betrayal ignited murderous rage. "You will be the first to die!" Griffin screamed at Kemp. "I will make an example of you!" The hunt had begun. Act 6. The Final Hunt. Dr. Kemp fled through the streets with an invisible killer in pursuit. But the town had learned. They could not see Griffin, but they could track him. Fresh snow revealed footprints appearing from nowhere. Breath condensed in the cold air, marking his position. Blood from injuries left trails of crimson drops suspended in space. The entire community united. Armed with nets, clubs, and courage born of desperation, they cornered the invisible man. Griffin fought savagely. His fists struck faces. His teeth bit flesh. He clawed and kicked and struggled with the strength of absolute terror. But he was outnumbered, exhausted, starving, wounded. A spade, swung blindly, connected with invisible bone. Griffin fell. As life drained from him, a miracle occurred, or perhaps a mercy. Slowly, cell by cell, his body returned. First as a faint shimmer, then as translucent flesh. Finally, as solid, visible humanity. The crowd gathered around the corpse of what had been the invisible man. He looked small, ordinary, mortal, just a man after all. Closing. The warning remains. The story of Griffin spread across England, then across the world. Scientists debated whether his discovery was real or madness, but those who saw the body materialize knew the truth. Griffin had conquered one of nature's greatest mysteries. He had achieved what no human had achieved before. But he had not conquered himself. His tragedy was not the loss of visibility. It was the loss of conscience. Isolation had removed the invisible bonds of empathy, responsibility, and humanity that connect us all. In seeking to rise above mankind, he had fallen below it. The Invisible Man's notebooks were never found. Perhaps Marvel destroyed them. Perhaps they remain hidden, waiting for another ambitious mind to repeat Griffin's mistake. But the lesson endures. Knowledge without wisdom does not elevate humanity. Power without restraint does not free us. And the greatest danger is not what we cannot see, but what we refuse to recognize in ourselves.